The light from the window fell in strips across her bare shoulder as she stood at the sink, rinsing a wine glass from the night before. I sat at the edge of the kitchen stool, still damp from the shower I didn't expect to take here, wearing a shirt that wasn't mine. She hadn't noticed me watching, or maybe she had, but the silence between us felt like something sacred. She didn't speak, just let her fingers trace the rim of the glass, lost in thought. And in that moment, I realized something quiet and terrifying. I didn't want to go home. I moved into the basement apartment in early March, when the nights still dipped into the low 30s and the sidewalks hadn't remembered how to be warm yet. It was temporary. That's what I told myself. Just a few months while I figured things out after breaking my lease with Amy. The landlord was some retired architect, lived upstairs with his wife. He gave me a key and a shrug and said they mostly kept to themselves. Her name was Evelyn. I didn't meet her right away. The first few days were just the thump of footsteps above me, muted laughter through the vents, the hum of old jazz drifting down late at night. I'd lie awake on the narrow futon, eyes tracing the shadowed ceiling beams, and wonder what kind of couple still slow danced in their kitchen after 40. Then one afternoon, she knocked on my door. I was shirtless, unpacking a box of books, sweat clinging to my back even though it was barely spring. The knock startled me, sharp, deliberate. When I opened the door, I expected a neighbor. Someone with a complaint about the noise or a misdelivered package. But it was her. She had dark auburn hair pulled into a low twist, loose strands falling against her cheek. Her skin was the kind that seemed untouched by time, not because it was flawless, but because it carried itself like it didn't need to prove anything. She wore a long black cardigan over what looked like a simple silk blouse, sleeves pushed up to the elbow. Her wrist bones caught the light. "Sorry to bother," she said, her voice low measured. "You left your mailbox key in the lock." She held it out between her fingers, delicate, tapered fingers with no rings. I blinked, embarrassed, reached for the key. "Oh, thanks," I said too quickly. "I guess I wasn't thinking." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That happens." And then she turned to leave, just like that, effortless, unhurried. "Wait," I said, unsure why. "You're Evelyn, right?" She stopped, half-turned. "Yes. I'm Leo. I just moved in." She studied me then, not the polite kind of glance, but something slower, assessing, like she was filing away the details of me for later use. "I know," she said, and with that, she walked back up the stairs, her cardigan trailing behind her like a shadow. That night, I heard the same jazz, but this time, it wasn't just music. It felt like a signal. Over the next few weeks, we crossed paths more often. In the shared backyard when she was trimming the little herb garden by the fence. On the front steps when she was bringing in groceries, always alone, always with her keys in hand before she needed them. She moved like someone who'd spent years mastering her own space. We didn't speak much at first. A nod, a hello, a passing comment about the weather. But there was something in the way she held eye contact, steady, unflinching, that made everything feel heavier than it was. She must have been in her early 40s. Maybe a little older. I never asked. It didn't matter. She carried herself like someone who'd survived things and didn't need to explain them anymore. One evening, I was coming in late with a pizza box and saw her standing by the mailbox. She looked up as I approached, her expression unreadable. "Late dinner?" she asked. I held up the box sheepishly. "Bachelor staple." She gave a soft laugh, not unkind, but not amused either. "Just real. You know," she said, "my husband used to live off pizza before he stopped coming home." It landed between us with a kind of quiet finality. I didn't know what to say, and thankfully, she didn't wait for a response. She just opened her mailbox, retrieved a single envelope, and walked back inside. I stood there for a moment longer than I should have, the warmth from the pizza bleeding through the box and into my hands. She didn't say he left, or that he died, just that he stopped coming home. And for some reason, that felt more intimate than either. I started spending more time in the backyard. It wasn't a decision, exactly, more like a quiet pull. I'd sit out there in the late afternoons with a book or my laptop, pretending to work, letting the sun graze my skin while shadows lengthened across the grass. Sometimes I'd hear her upstairs, the soft clatter of dishes, the rhythm of footsteps crossing hardwood. But often, she was already out there when I arrived. Kneeling beside the raised garden bed, gloved hands deep in soil, her face turned toward the light like she was coaxing warmth from it. We talked more. At first, it was idle, plants, the weather, how fast the seasons were shifting. She told me lavender was surprisingly hard to keep alive if you overwater it. I told her I killed a cactus once by accident. She smiled at that, and it wasn't the polite kind. It was the kind that softened the corners of her mouth like she hadn't smiled in a while and had forgotten what it felt like. One Thursday, she offered me tea. Said she made too much. I followed her up to the patio without thinking. The kitchen smelled like chamomile and citrus. The windows were open, sheer curtains breathing with the wind. Everything inside the house looked touched, nothing sterile, nothing post. Just lived in. There were books stacked sideways on the counter, mismatched mugs, a dish towel slung over the back of a chair. She handed me a cup without ceremony. "Hope you like ginger," she said. "I don't know if I do," I admitted. She laughed quietly. "You'll find out." We stood there, each with a mug in hand, steam curling in the space between us. Her presence filled the room without trying. She didn't demand attention, she just held it. I looked at her, not in that hungry, obvious way, just long enough to notice how her collarbone curved beneath the fabric of her shirt, how a single freckle lived just under her jawline. She caught me looking, but didn't look away. Instead, she asked, "What brought you here, really?" I took a sip. It burned, but I welcomed it. "Needed somewhere quiet," I said. Life got noisy. She nodded slowly, like she understood. Then, after a pause, "You ever miss the noise?" "Sometimes," I said, "but not as much as I thought I would." She didn't respond, just stared out the window. And in that silence, I felt something shift again, a layer peeling back, not because we forced it, but because it was time. We started sharing more after that. Not secrets, not yet, but smaller things. I learned she used to teach literature at the college before the department downsized. That she painted, but only in the winter. That she liked old French films but hated subtitles. She learned I used to run track. That I broke my ankle senior year, and it changed everything. That I once thought I'd be a teacher too, before I fell out of love with classrooms. One night, I came home late and saw the upstairs light still on. Her shadow moved behind the curtain, slow and deliberate. I lingered in the yard longer than I needed to. Not waiting, exactly. Just existing in proximity. She must have seen me. The next morning, she was in the garden when I came out. No gloves. Just her, bare hands in the rosemary. "You looked restless last night," she said softly. I didn't ask how she knew. "Couldn't sleep," I answered. She studied me for a moment. "Come by later. I'll make something warm." And I did. That night, she made lentil soup, crusty bread on the side. We didn't talk much. The air was full enough. At one point, I noticed her hand resting on the table, fingers loose, the veins in her wrist like soft rivers. I wanted to reach out. Just touch. Just anchor. But I didn't. Instead, I let the quiet hold us. And when I stood to leave, she walked me to the door and said my name, just my name, like she was testing the weight of it in her mouth. I went back downstairs, heart knocking in my ribs like it wanted out. It became a rhythm, something unspoken between us. I'd hear her above me in the mornings, soft footsteps crossing wood, the occasional clink of dishes. Sometimes music. She liked the old stuff, Nina Simone, Bill Evans, a little Lucinda Williams. I never mentioned I could hear it, but I memorized her soundtrack like it was mine to keep. Every few days, she'd knock on my door. Sometimes with tea, sometimes just to ask if I could help her lift something heavy, a box in the garage, a garden pot, a broken chair leg. They were never things she couldn't manage herself. Not really. I understood that eventually. Once, she asked me to help move a set of bookshelves in her office. She led me down a narrow hallway to a room lined with old hardcovers and worn paperbacks, every shelf arranged with careful chaos. When I brushed dust off the top plank, my arm bumped hers, and she didn't move away. Her breath caught, just a little, and I pretended not to notice. But I did. I noticed everything. That night, I lay awake in the basement and thought about that breath. The way it broke the air for just a second, the way her body stayed close, deliberately still. I kept seeing her fingers wrapped around a tea mug. The way she said my name. She didn't invite me upstairs for 3 days after that. I told myself I didn't care. Told myself I was just her tenant, that this was all just neighborly kindness. But it was a lie I was getting worse at believing. Every quiet hour felt a little heavier than the one before. When she finally knocked again, it was a Sunday evening. She held a tray with 2 small bowls of something that smelled sweet, warm fruit, cinnamon maybe, and honey. She didn't say much. Just, "Try this," and walked inside. We sat at her kitchen island. She stood across from me, leaning on her elbows, hair tucked behind one ear. The tension was different now, less hesitant, more curious. She was watching me. "What is this?" I asked between bites. "Something I used to make for my son." I paused, spoon halfway to my mouth. "You have a son?" "Had," she corrected gently. "He would have been 26 this year." I swallowed too quickly. It burned going down. "I'm sorry," I said. She nodded. "It's been 8 years. Still feels like it happened last winter." For a long moment, I didn't say anything. I didn't know how to. "I don't talk about him often," she said, almost to herself. "I used to think that was strength. But it's not. It's just another kind of hiding." I wanted to reach for her hand, to cross that distance and remind her she wasn't invisible. But I didn't. Instead, I said the only thing that felt true. "You don't have to hide with me." She looked up then, really looked. Her eyes were a little glassy, not with tears, but with memory. There was a silence that stretched between us, not awkward, but wide and full, like the space between stars. "Thank you," she said finally, voice low. "That means more than you know." We didn't talk much after that. We just finished the fruit bowls. She walked me to the door like always, but this time, she stood a little closer. Her hand brushed my arm as she opened it. The contact was brief, accidental, maybe, but it stayed with me the rest of the night. Downstairs, I poured myself a drink I didn't need and sat on the edge of the bed, heart too loud in my chest. I stared at the ceiling for hours, trying to name the feeling building in me. It wasn't infatuation. It wasn't fantasy. It was something steadier, something that made my bones ache. I knew then, this wasn't a line we were walking. It was a ledge, and one of us would have to fall first. By mid-April, the backyard smelled like thyme and clean air, and she had started sitting outside with me in the evenings. Not every night, just the ones when the sky turned that impossible blue-gray and the breeze had some weight to it. She'd bring 2 mugs, not tea anymore, but a thin red wine she never named, and we'd drink without ceremony on the stone steps behind the garden. It became our hour. No talk of bills or work or the weather. Just music from the open kitchen window and the steady quiet that came when neither of us pretended not to feel what was gathering between us. She told me once that grief doesn't stay sharp forever, that after a while, it just hums. You forget it's even there until someone says a name, or you walk past a song, and suddenly it swells up again, huge and wordless. "Do you still feel it?" I asked. She nodded, took a long sip of wine. "Not always. But when I do, it knocks the breath right out of me." That night, she rested her hand on the step beside mine. Not touching, just near. Her pinky was barely an inch away, close enough I could feel the warmth radiating from it. I didn't move. I didn't dare. The ache was in the not touching, the restraint, the choice. I started noticing the smaller things. The way she hummed under her breath when cooking. The small crease at her temple that deepened when she read. How she wore the same old cardigan every morning like armor against something no one else could see. I noticed all of it, and I guarded it like secrets. I didn't tell anyone about her. Not friends. Not my sister when she called to ask if I was seeing someone. I couldn't. What would I even say? I think I'm falling for the woman upstairs. She's twice as still as anyone I've ever known. She's soft in the exact places the world has made me hard. It wasn't romantic, not in the way people usually mean. There were no grand declarations. No music swells or sweeping gestures. Just 2 people finding shelter in the spaces where nothing needed to be said. Until one night, everything got too quiet. It was late. I'd been out with coworkers, had 2 drinks I didn't really want, laughed at jokes that didn't land. When I came home, the lights upstairs were still on. I stood in the driveway longer than I meant to, looking up. I should have gone inside. I should have left it, but I didn't. I walked up the steps and knocked. She answered in a slate gray t-shirt and soft pajama pants, barefoot. Her hair was unpinned, falling over one shoulder. She looked surprised, but not unwelcoming. I started. I couldn't sleep. She stepped aside without a word. We sat in her living room, the lamp casting soft gold across her knees. A half-finished book rested on the arm of the couch. I didn't ask what it was. She didn't offer. "Do you miss him every day?" I asked, voice low. She didn't answer right away. Just stared into her hands like they held something fragile. "No," she said finally. And that's the part one never know what to do with. Some days I forget. Some days I feel like I'm forgetting on purpose. I nodded, because I understood. I didn't know her son, but I knew what it meant to carry guilt for the things you no longer felt. "I'm not here to replace anything," I said. She looked at me then. Really looked. "I know," she whispered. "But you're still here." I didn't move closer. I didn't say more. I just let her words settle, heavy and full. Eventually, I left. She walked me to the door again, like always. But this time, when I turned to say goodnight, she reached for my hand, not to pull me in, but just to hold it. Her fingers slid against mine, light and warm. We stood like that in the entryway, hands joined, not looking at each other. And I knew, if she let go, it would mean stop. But she didn't. Not yet. We didn't talk about that night. Not the hand-holding. Not the silence that wrapped around us like a wool coat. The next morning, I heard her upstairs, kettle whistling like usual, footsteps crossing from kitchen to hallway. Everything sounded the same. But it wasn't. Something had shifted. She left a plate outside my door that afternoon. Slices of blood orange and 2 pieces of dark chocolate arranged on a napkin. No note. Just quiet care, like she was telling me without words that it wasn't a mistake, and that we didn't need to name it. The restraint between us started to take on its own shape. A language of glances, pauses, and almosts. I started craving it, that tension, the way her eyes would hold mine just a beat longer than necessary, the way she'd rest her hand on the back of my chair when passing by, close enough for my skin to react. One evening, we were in the garden again, drinking tea this time, not wine. She wore a heavy cardigan over a sundress, bare feet brushing against the cool grass. I used to think desire was something that faded with age, she said quietly. But it doesn't. It just gets quieter. Smarter, maybe. It learns to wait. I watched the steam rise from her cup. Are you waiting for something? She looked at me, her gaze steady. I don't know. Maybe I'm waiting to not feel guilty about wanting. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just felt something in my chest unravel, some old belief about what love was supposed to look like, how it was supposed to start. A few days later, it rained. Soft, steady, grounding rain. I stood in my apartment, listening to it hit the window, and then I heard footsteps on the stairs. A knock. I opened the door, and there she was, hair damp, sweater pulled tight around her frame, eyes searching mine. I don't want to be alone tonight, she said. Not like this. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. She stepped inside, and I lit a candle on the table, not because we needed light, but because the overhead bulb felt too harsh. We didn't sit on the couch. We sat on the floor, backs against the wall, sharing the blanket I usually kept folded on the foot of the bed. We talked in half-whispers. She told me about her first love, a boy with chipped teeth and calloused hands. She told me about the day she gave birth, about the silence in the delivery room when the baby didn't cry right away, and how that silence shaped everything after. She told me her marriage ended slowly, like a leak that you don't notice until the floor is ruined. I told her about my father's temper, about the time I broke my wrist and lied about how it happened, about how I spent most of my 20s trying not to turn into him. At one point, our legs were touching. Just barely, the kind of contact that's easy to pretend away. But neither of us moved. Eventually, she leaned her head onto my shoulder, and I let it stay there. Her breathing slowed, evened out, settled against me. My hand hovered, just above her knee, then pulled back, not out of fear, but reverence. She fell asleep like that, and I didn't move for over an hour. When she finally stirred, she blinked up at me, dazed and soft. I should go, she whispered. You can stay, I said, just as quiet. She hesitated, then sat up fully, kissed my shoulder, not my cheek, not my mouth, just the curve of bone beneath my t-shirt. Not yet, she said, but thank you. And then she was gone. The morning after she kissed my shoulder, everything felt too still. I opened the curtains just enough to let the light in, then sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on my knees, trying to make sense of the way my body felt full and empty at the same time. She didn't knock that day. No tray with tea. No garden visit. But I heard her. I heard her moving through her house. Heard the same songs. Heard the window creak open above mine. She was there close and impossibly far. By the third day, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed something, a word, a look, anything to tell me I hadn't imagined it. So I went upstairs. When she opened the door, her eyes flicked with something unreadable, not surprise, not regret, but something heavier, something like mourning. I wasn't avoiding you, she said softly, stepping aside. I nodded. I know. But neither of us moved further into the space. Instead, we stood in the hallway, the scent of old wood and lemon soap between us. I watched her reach for a sweater draped over the banister, tug it close around her ribs like armor. You scared me, she said. That night. Why? Because I didn't feel old, or broken, or lonely. I felt, wanted. And it's been a long time since I let myself feel that without consequence. I wanted to say I understood. that I didn't want to cost her anything. But what came out was simpler. I didn't mean to make this harder. You didn't, she said. You reminded me I still feel. She led me to the kitchen. We didn't sit this time. We just stood facing each other, like two people reading a goodbye in the other's face before it was spoken. If I were younger, she said, or you were older, we'd still be standing right here, I interrupted, trying to figure out how to hold this without hurting each other. That made her smile. A soft, resigned smile. She stepped closer, barely, and looked up at me like she was memorizing something. I want to kiss you, she whispered. Not because I should, but because I want to remember what it's like to be chosen. I didn't say anything. Just let the moment carry us. When her mouth met mine, it wasn't hungry. It was careful, tender, like she was sealing something shut, not opening it. My hand found the curve of her neck, and I held it like I was afraid she'd vanish if I let go. It lasted only seconds, but it felt like a whole life played out in that kiss. When we pulled away, she rested her forehead against mine. This doesn't get to be anything more, she said, barely breathing. I know, but I'm grateful, she added, for all of it. So am I. And that was it. I walked back down the stairs and into the hush of my apartment, the world unchanged outside, but everything shifted inside me. We didn't pretend after that. We didn't reach for what we couldn't hold, but we smiled more, lingered a little longer in the garden, shared tea when it rained, and in that quiet, I learned something no one had ever taught me. Not everything real has to last. Some things matter simply because they happened. Because for a brief, fleeting season, we were seen. And sometimes, that's enough.